Hello everybody, welcome to this article presentation in week 7. Today, Chile and I will be talking about the Lafuente and Goldenberg study about the role of the first language in instructed second language acquisition. So let's get started. We divided this presentation into two parts. In the first part, I'll be explaining the background of the study together with the literature review, the research question and the purpose of the study, to then briefly look at its significance and value. Towards the last part, I'll be explaining all about the methodology. In the second part, Chile will be explaining the results and their interpretation, some pedagogical implications, the limitations of the study, future suggestions, and our own critique. The presentation will conclude with a group discussion question that we really hope you enjoy today. To understand the background of the study, it is necessary to look back at the history of the role of L1 use in instructional settings. So, Cook tells us that from the end of the 19th century, it has been assumed that a new language, or an L2, should be taught without consideration of the learner's L1. The authors of this study point out that the emergence of SLA as a field of study gave support to this idea. For example, Krashen's input hypothesis suggests that all students need to acquire a second language is lots and lots of exposure to comprehensible input in the target language. In this sense, Krashen argues that L1 use in the classroom will decrease the amount of L2 input. In the 90s, the conception of the native speaker as the model to follow also promoted the idea of the L1 as of undesirable use in the L2 classroom. It wasn't before the late 20th century that this monolingual classroom orientation started to be challenged. This coincides with the questioning of Krashen's ideas. In fact, some people like Cook started to refer to L2 learners as multi-competent learners instead of deficient monolinguals. In a similar vein, authors like Widdowson argued that monolingual instruction is pretty much impossible, since students come with a fully developed language system in their brains that it just cannot be switched off. Some other authors have referred to learners L1 as the elephant in the room. In other words, a major problem or controversial issue, which is obviously present, but is avoided as a subject for discussion. Over the last 3 decades, classroom research on L1 use has focused on documenting its presence and purposes. Researchers have focused on teachers and students' L1 use, but not so much on its potential benefits. Research also suggests that the belief that L1 use has a negative impact on L2 learning still prevails today. In this sense, the authors suggest that the potential advantages of the L1 use in ISLA have been understudied. They also refer to how some influential theories of L2 learning fully ignore the role of the L1. Although there isn't much evidence of the benefits of the L1 use, there is a growing body of descriptive research on this matter, suggesting that the exclusive use of the target language in EFL contexts is very rare. To conclude, although the scarce research suggests that L1 use may have positive effects on second language learning, there is little empirical research. This research gap was the motivation for the Lafuente and Goldenberg study. The purpose of the study is to investigate the effect of the L1 use on students' L2 learning. However, the authors emphasized the use of what they called a principled approach to L1 use in the EFL classroom. They based on Levine's 2014 work about the use of L1 as a tool for specific purposes in the classroom. For example, procedural communication, regulating behaviors, reducing learners' anxiety, and make explicit grammar or vocabulary points. This leads to the one research question of the study, which is very extensive, by the way. Basically, the researchers aim to investigate whether an informed use of the L1 in a foreign language classroom has an effect on students' L2 learning, and to what extent. The importance of the study comes from the lack of literature on the use of the L1 in instructional L2 settings. Additionally, as argued by the authors, they are pioneers in assessing the effectiveness of a principled approach to L1 use in the classroom. Its value also relates to its implications for the field of foreign or second language learning and teaching. The participant group consisted of 52 undergraduate students between 18 and 29 years old. It was a gender mixed group attending a beginner Spanish course at a university in the US. All the participants were native speakers of English, except for 8 learners. However, they were highly proficient in the language. Additionally, 6 university teachers participated in the study as well. 4 were native speakers of Spanish and 2 were native speakers of English. Importantly, all the instructors were highly qualified and experienced in teaching Spanish. The instruments consisted of a test called STAMP 4, which stands for Standards-Based Measurement of Proficiency. This is a computer-based language proficiency test developed by the University of Oregon, which focuses on writing and speaking only. Additionally, report surveys were applied with both students and instructors to estimate their use of the L1 or L2 in the classroom. These consisted of a set of statements that participants had to answer based on percentages, as you can see in the example. Finally, as we can observe, the study dealt with quantitative data only. The procedure was very straightforward. Participants were divided into 2 major groups of roughly the same size. One was named the plus L1 group, while the other was denominated the minus L1 group. Each group was assigned 3 different instructors for a whole semester, that is 15 weeks. And as you can imagine, the difference between the groups was that the instructors for the plus L1 group received training on the L1 used in the classroom. On the contrary, the minus L1 instructors did not receive any training and were not allowed to use their L1. The language proficiency test was first applied as a pre-test in week 3, and then it was applied again in week 16 as a post-test this time. Both students and instructors completed the report surveys in week 16 as well. This is the end of part 1. Thanks for your attention. Chile will take the lead now.
The scores obtained from the pre-tests and post-tests are displayed in the descriptive statistics. As you can see in Table 3, while both groups achieved higher scores in the post-test than the pre-tests, the plus L1 group achieved higher scores than the minus L1 group. While the minus L1 group has achieved a mean score of 3.74 for speaking and 4.13 for writing, the plus L1 group has achieved a mean score of 4.20 for speaking and 4.67 for writing, displaying higher degrees of improvement in the post-tests for both speaking and writing performances. Analyses of covariance were employed in order to answer the research question. As you can see in Table 5, significant differences were identified between the plus L1 group and minus L1 group for both speaking and writing performances. The p-values are statistically significant. The eta squared values can be interpreted as medium effect, and the Cohen's d values can be interpreted as large effects. The study results provide no support for the current pedagogical concerns in the potential detrimental effect of use of first language on second language development. More importantly, the significant differences in the post-test performances between the 2 groups point to a potentially more important role of the first language. These results support Macker's optimal position to first language use, which recognizes the benefits of first language as a metacognitive tool and scaffold for language development. And finally, principled use of first language in language classroom may have beneficial effects in the development of speaking and writing proficiencies. The report surveys have provided evidence of first language use in the classrooms. The results indicated high consistency in the assigned pedagogy. It also indicated that the use of the first language for interactions between the students were not controlled. And therefore, there were much lower consistency in the students' use of first language. So, While teachers may be able to implement a principled approach to their own use of the first language, it is much harder to control how the learners operate within a given framework. The study suggested some pedagogical implications. Firstly, the findings of this study have important implications for conceptualizing the role of the first language as a cognitive and linguistic resource in foreign language classrooms. This means that task-based pedagogy can be implemented more effectively with a principled use of the first language. Secondly, in order to help language teachers understand the functionalities of first language as a learning tool, the benefits of particular use of the first language in foreign language classrooms should be included in teacher development trainings. And thirdly, both teachers and educational policymakers should be encouraged to adopt a learner-centered approach which recognizes the role of the first language as a valuable resource. The limitations of this study are the relatively small sample of the participants and the inclusion of 8 participants who do not speak English as their first language. As these participants are operating through 2 foreign languages in the classroom, it raises more questions. For future research, the study suggested to investigate the effects of classroom first language use on listening and reading proficiencies. And more studies of the same nature are also suggested to address the potential effect of the first language use at intermediate and advanced levels. Cross-sectional studies are also suggested in order to examine the potential effect of specific L1 functions, particularly in terms of meta-language and focus on form. Regarding the strengths and weakness of the study, we found that it was well-structured, has a very detailed and well-articulated literature review, employed additional assessments to ensure the validity of the data, and conducted surveys for both teachers and students for additional evidence. However, we found the research question unclear due to the inclusion of too much information. Also, while the study seemingly aimed to investigate the effectiveness of principled use of the first language by both teacher and students, the study only answered the research question in terms of the teacher's first language use. And for the methodology, while the participants were divided between the true beginners and false beginners, whether if the difference can lead to different degrees of effect or not was not addressed. We also found some typing mistakes in the article, including an error on Table 6. The presented study has addressed the effectiveness of first language use in foreign language classroom for beginning learners. For the discussion, we would like you to consider the functionalities of the first language in foreign language teaching. The question is, to what extent and for what purposes would you use the first language in your future language teaching?